Hey everyone. Welcome back to Hoa Karen Stories. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're all having an awesome time. Because I've got a wild story for you. Alright. Now let's get into today's tale. Picture this, Joe's just minding his own business when a Hoa, led by none other than Karen, demands he repaint his house in the most boring, beige colors imaginable. But instead of caving in, Joe decides to fight back in the most creative way possible, by making his house disappear. And when Karen tries to stop him, it leads to a showdown that'll have you cheering for Joe. Stick around to find out how this unforgettable saga unfolds. Joe had been sitting on his porch, enjoying a peaceful afternoon, when the unmistakable sight of an envelope caught his eye. It was a thick, off-white card, embossed with that dreaded Hoa logo, a stylized row of identical houses. The moment he saw it, his stomach churned. He already knew what it was, a notice. He ripped it open, barely able to contain his frustration, and began reading. The words seemed to blur as his anger surged. Notice of exterior color non-compliance. His perfectly good, slightly faded light blue house, his pride, was now a violation of the community's aesthetic harmony. A violation. He let out a breath, the absurdity of it all sinking in. They want me to repaint it, Joe muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. In beige. All these shades of beige. He scanned the letter, feeling a sickening sense of déjà vu. Gentle fawn, whispering wheat, subtle stone. The words seemed to drain the life out of him. It wasn't just any beige. It was a palette designed to make every house blend into the background, to erase any individuality. How is this even a thing? Joe thought, pacing his porch. The phone was already in his hand. With a single, exasperated press, he called his best friend Mark, the one person who could always make him laugh in the face of these absurd situations. Mark, Joe said, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. You are not going to believe the fresh hell the Hoa has unleashed upon me. Mark's chuckle echoed through the phone. Let me guess. They don't like your color, Joe scoffed, unable to keep his frustration in check. Worse. They want me to repaint my house. Beige. A whole new shade of beige. Can you believe that? There was a pause. Mark let out a hearty laugh. Beige? That's peak Hoa nonsense right there. You've got to fight this. I mean, come on. This is a hill worth dying on. I know. Right? Joe replied, feeling a surge of defiance. It's not like I painted my house neon pink or anything. But beige? That's the line in the sand? Mark's laughter faded into a more serious tone. Man. Fight the beige power. You can't let them win. Joe nodded, the seed of rebellion starting to take root. The battle was about to begin, and he was ready for it. The following day, Joe's frustration had reached its boiling point. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the bland, beige swatches the Hoa had sent, feeling the oppressive weight of their rules pressing down on him. Beige. How could anyone want a house to look like it had been swallowed by the earth? His mind was racing, plotting something, anything to stick it to the Hoa. Then it hit him. The idea felt like a spark of genius. What if my house could disappear? What if he could turn his house into a visual trick? An optical illusion so well crafted that it would make the Hoa's demands seem ridiculous. He grabbed his phone and dialed Mark. You won't believe this, Joe said, excitement threading his voice. I've got an idea. And it's insane. Mark was quiet for a beat, clearly trying to gauge the situation. I'm listening. Joe grinned. What if I camouflaged my house? Like, made it look invisible. Completely blend it into the surroundings so the Hoa can't even see it. Mark let out a snort. Wait. Are you serious? You want to turn your house into a mirage? Like some kind of urban stealth project? Exactly, Joe replied. But I need help. I'm not an artist. I need someone who knows how to make this work. Do you know anyone? Mark paused, then let out a slow whistle. You need the illusionist. Kevin, he's the guy for something like this. He's got a crazy talent for visual tricks. Makes stuff disappear right in front of your eyes. I'll give you his number." That night, Joe found himself dialing Kevin, his heart pounding with the anticipation of what might be possible. The phone rang twice before a voice answered with a cheerful, "The illusionist at your service." "Hi." Joe started, feeling a little ridiculous. "I have a very unusual project. I need to make my house disappear, visually. I mean." There was a pause on the other end. And then Kevin let out a hearty laugh. "Disappear, you say? Very intriguing. Tell me more." Joe explained the entire situation, the Hoa's ridiculous demands, the beige palette, and his desire for revenge. Kevin listened intently, his excitement building as Joe laid out the idea. "You want to camouflage your house into its surroundings? I love a good challenge," Kevin finally said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "I've done stuff like this before." "You're talking about an optical illusion on a massive scale." Joe could feel a sense of relief wash over him. "Yes. Exactly. But I need someone who can take my vague idea and turn it into something real." Kevin paused thoughtfully. "All right. I'm in. I'll come over tomorrow to check out the space. And we'll figure this out." The next day, Kevin arrived like a whirlwind, bright, eccentric, and ready to create some magic. His overalls were splattered with paint, and his glasses were an explosion of color, completely mismatched with the dull world around them. He started pacing around Joe's house, eyes scanning the surroundings. "Okay. So here's what we're working with," Kevin muttered to himself. "We've got some solid natural camouflage here, big oak tree on the side, the thick shrubbery in the back. This can work." Joe held up the Hoa's dreadful color palette. "Here's the catch," he said. "They want earth tones. But I'm not sure I can do this with just beige. I need something more creative." Kevin's eyes lit up. He grabbed the swatches and held them up against the backdrop of trees. "Earth tones? These are blah tones," he said, bursting out laughing. "But don't worry. We can work with this. We'll enhance them. Think of it as camouflage with a beige base coat." Joe grinned, already picturing it in his mind. Kevin's energy was contagious. He didn't just want to make the house blend in, he wanted to make it disappear. And Joe was all in. Kevin pulled out a sketchbook, his pencil flying across the page. "We'll use geometric patterns. Strategically placed voids, areas that'll trick the eye into thinking they're empty spaces. We'll break up the lines of the house, so it looks like it's just part of the landscape." He glanced at Joe, his eyes sparkling with excitement. The garage door, gone. The windows, almost invisible. "This will be a masterpiece." Joe's heart raced. This could actually work. "Trust me," Kevin said with a wink. "By the time we're done, your house won't just blend in, it'll vanish." The plan was set in motion. They were about to turn Joe's house into the ultimate act of rebellion, a living optical illusion that would drive the Hoa crazy. And for Joe, it was the sweetest form of revenge. The approval from the Hoa arrived within days. Joe still couldn't believe it. They had stamped his paint samples with a quick glance, seemingly unaware that the earth tones they'd approved were anything but typical beige. Joe felt a smug satisfaction as he checked the email again. The Hoa had unwittingly given the green light to his visual rebellion. It was time to begin Operation Vanishing House. The following morning, Kevin arrived with a small army of painters, all wearing overalls stained with the evidence of countless artistic endeavors. They brought ladders, brushes, and a sense of excitement that Joe could feel in his bones. Kevin was the first to speak, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "All right. Let's do this. We're turning this place into a masterpiece." Joe watched with awe as Kevin and his team set up the scaffolding around his house. They worked with precision, positioning themselves in strategic spots as they began sketching out the design. Kevin had outlined the geometric patterns the night before, and now it was time to bring them to life. "Remember," Kevin called to his crew, We need to mess with perspective. Disrupt the straight lines. Break up the shape. We want the human eye to have trouble recognizing this as a house. Joe stepped back, watching as the team began applying the first layer. The beige base coat went on quickly, but it was the next layer that really made the magic happen. Angled stripes and irregular shapes appeared, creating a sense of movement, almost like the house itself was shifting before his eyes. Every few strokes, Joe would ask for adjustments, making sure the patterns aligned with the trees and sky. "You see that?" Kevin asked as he stepped back to admire the work. "We're creating voids, places where the eye expects a solid object, but all it sees is empty space. This is how we're going to make your house disappear." Joe couldn't believe how fast it was coming together. The patterns seemed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding environment, the edges of the house becoming softer and more abstract. The garage door, which had once been a prominent feature, was now just an indistinct blur of shapes. The windows had been outlined in a way that made them appear like reflections of the sky and trees. From a distance, it already looked like the house was starting to fade into the background. As the day wore on, the transformation became more and more striking. Joe could hardly recognize his own home. The house no longer had any discernible shape. The shadows and highlights created by the paint made it appear as though it had been carved out of the landscape itself. By the time evening arrived, Kevin and his team were finishing up the final touches. The scaffolding came down, and Joe stood back to admire the work. It looked like the house had just vanished from the street. All he could see was a patch of green, a few trees, and the faint outline of where his home used to be. Kevin handed him a pair of cheap cardboard 3D glasses. "Put these on," he said with a mischievous smile. "Walk across the street. Stand right there." Joe took the glasses, feeling both nervous and excited, and followed the instructions. He stood at the spot Kevin had pointed to, positioned exactly across from his house. He slipped the glasses on, and for a moment, nothing seemed to change. But then, his jaw dropped. There it was, nothing. The house was completely gone. The only way to describe it was like staring at a blank canvas. A vacant lot where his home should have been. He took the glasses off, and his house reappeared in a pixelated, abstract form. It was there, but the illusion had worked so well that it seemed to defy logic. "Wow," Joe muttered, his heart racing with excitement. "It's perfect." Mark arrived shortly after, looking skeptical. "All right. Show me this invisible house of yours." Joe handed him the 3D glasses with a grin. "Just wait for it," he said. Mark put on the glasses and stepped across the street. He froze in place, staring at the empty lot where the house had been. Joe watched, barely able to contain his laughter, as Mark's mouth dropped open in shock. "No way," Mark whispered, still staring. "This is insane. You actually did it. Your house is gone." Joe's laughter was unstoppable. "It's vanishing, my friend. It's working." The illusion had been perfected, and with it, Joe had succeeded in turning his house into the ultimate statement of rebellion. No more beige tyranny. No more oppressive Hoa rules. His house was now a local legend, and soon, the entire neighborhood would find out. The next morning, Joe sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee and casually scrolling through his phone when he saw a flash of movement outside his window. He barely had time to register it when his doorbell rang, shattering the morning peace. He opened the door to find Karen, the Hoa president, standing on his porch, her face red with fury. Her usual beige pantsuit looked more disheveled than ever, as if the weight of the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity was starting to take its toll. "Joe Taylor," she snapped, barely containing her outrage. "What have you done?" Joe raised an eyebrow, pretending not to know exactly what she was talking about. "Good morning, Karen. Is something wrong?" She glanced up and down the street, her eyes wild. "Where is it? Where is your house? It's gone. It's disappeared. This is an absolute outrage." Joe suppressed a grin. He'd seen this coming. "My house is right there, Karen," he said, pointing casually at the spot where his home should have been. Karen stared at the empty lot, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. She pulled out her phone, quickly tapping the screen, likely trying to confirm the address or even call the authorities. You've got to be kidding me. It's invisible," she sputtered. "This is a public safety hazard. This is illegal. You can't just make your house vanish." Joe shrugged. "Well, I didn't technically make it vanish. I just made it blend in a little better with the surroundings. You know, camouflage." Karen's face turned a shade of red Joe didn't think was humanly possible. "This is against the rules. This is witchcraft," she hissed. Trembling with fury, she immediately dialed a number, no doubt calling the police to deal with what she deemed an urgent crisis. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled up to the curb, lights flashing but sirens off. The officer, a young guy with an easy smile, stepped out of the car and gave Joe a polite nod. He glanced at Karen, who was now pacing frantically, her arms flailing in indignation. "Ma'am," the officer said, clearly trying to keep things professional, "what seems to be the problem?" Karen wasted no time. "This man has made his house disappear," she practically shrieked, pointing wildly at the empty lot. "It's a public hazard. It's illegal. He's breaking the law." The officer looked at Joe, then back at the space where the house was supposed to be. He squinted for a moment, then shrugged. "I can see the house just fine, ma'am. It's right there," he said, pointing directly at the spot where the house was camouflaged, almost invisible in the morning light. "In fact, I'd say it's blending in pretty well with the trees and the sky." Karen's mouth hung open in disbelief. What are you talking about? It's gone. He's using witchcraft." The officer tried to hold back a chuckle, clearly struggling to keep his composure. "Ma'am, I'm gonna have to suggest you take a deep breath. Maybe visit an optometrist. Your neighbor's house is fine. It's right there, hidden in plain sight." Joe couldn't contain himself any longer. He stepped forward, feigning innocence. "You know, Karen, maybe you're just not seeing things from the right perspective," he said, his voice dripping with sweet sarcasm. "Maybe you need these." He pulled out a pair of cheap 3D glasses from his pocket, the ones Kevin had given him after the paint job was complete. "These will help," he said with a wink. The officer raised an eyebrow but couldn't help but laugh as he watched Karen's face twist in frustration. "Karen, you might want to try the glasses," he said, holding them out to her. Without saying another word, Karen snatched the glasses, her fingers shaking with rage. She slid them on and immediately marched across the street, glaring at Joe as she walked. She stopped dead in her tracks as the 3D glasses worked their magic. She blinked, looked around, and then did a double take, slowly backing away. What is this sorcery?" she gasped, her voice trembling. I can see it. The house. It's right there." The officer, clearly trying to contain his amusement, gave Joe a nod. "Ma'am, it's an illusion. He's created an optical illusion. Probably some kind of camouflage trick. Nothing illegal here." Karen was beyond words now. She took the glasses off, glaring at Joe with unbridled rage. "You're making a mockery of the community. This is an outrage. I'll be filing a formal complaint." The officer simply shrugged. "I suggest you do that, ma'am. But as far as I can see, there's no violation here. Just a creative homeowner." With that, the officer turned and walked back to his car, leaving Karen standing in the middle of the street, speechless and fuming. Joe couldn't help but smirk. He had won. But little did he know, the real fun was just beginning. By that afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Social media lit up with pictures and videos of Joe's invisible house, many of them taken by curious neighbors who had come by to see for themselves. People drove in from other neighborhoods, some even coming from nearby towns, all eager to witness the phenomenon. Local news stations picked up the story, interviewing Joe and even filming a few segments. The more people saw the house, the more it became a sensation. The viral TikTok video of the invisible house quickly surpassed 5 million views. And Joe found himself interviewed on local news, always wearing the 3D glasses for the cameras, playing up the absurdity. As for Karen, her authority within the Hoa began to crumble. The neighbors, once so compliant, now rallied behind Joe, applauding his creativity and rebelling against her bland, beige tyranny. And as for Joe, well, his invisible house had become a local legend, one that would go down in Hoa history as the ultimate act of defiance. It didn't take long for the fallout from Karen's little invisible house fiasco to reach its peak. By the time the Hoa meeting was called, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Joe had become a local legend, and his house had become a must-see attraction. Tourists from surrounding towns had started driving in, snapping photos, and even making TikToks of their own. People came in droves, each of them eager to see the mysterious disappearing house. The meeting took place in the community center, which, to no one's surprise, was decorated in the same dull beige as everything else. The walls, the carpet, even the chairs, they were all the same color, making the room feel like it was slowly suffocating under a blanket of conformity. Joe entered, ready for the showdown. As Karen stood at the front, her face a mask of fury. "This is an outrage," Karen began, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. This man has made a mockery of our community standards. A mockery." She paced the stage, her bond tighter than ever, as if the strain of trying to maintain control over the Hoa was pulling her every which way. "Mr. Taylor has violated the spirit of our neighborhood. He has painted his house with illusionary colors and camouflage techniques that are beyond what any reasonable person would consider acceptable. This is not art. This is an abomination." Joe stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, a confident smirk playing on his lips. The room was packed. Neighbors who had once whispered behind closed doors now openly supported Joe. Some even wore t-shirts with the words "Fight the Beige" on them. And a few had homemade signs that read, "Let the house stay." Karen, ignoring the supportive murmurs around her, continued, her voice shaking with indignation. "I have put forward a proposal to amend the Hoa bylaws. We will ban any kind of camouflage paint or illusionary art. No more tricks. No more witchcraft." She paused dramatically, looking around for support. "We cannot allow this to happen again." The crowd fell silent for a moment. But only for a moment. A voice from the back of the room spoke up, steady and strong. "Karen, you're really going to try and ban art?" It was Steve, a longtime neighbor who had always kept to himself. But now he stood tall, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're mad if you think we're going to let you take that away from him." Others chimed in, their voices full of conviction. "Joe's house is a masterpiece." Someone else added, "We've got to appreciate creativity, not shut it down." The room erupted into applause, and Joe felt a wave of pride swell in his chest. He could hardly believe it. The same neighbors who had once been afraid of the Hoa's power were now standing up to Karen. All because of his simple act of defiance. Karen's face reddened, and she pointed a shaking finger at Joe. "This is not acceptable. If we let this go, what's next? What happens when people start painting their houses with rainbow colors or neon lights?" Her voice trembled with the weight of her anger. "This is the beginning of the end. I won't let it happen." Another voice, this time from Mrs. Henley, a sweet lady who lived 2 doors down, rang out, "Karen, you need to calm down. We're all tired of your rules. Joe's house is fun. It's refreshing. We need a little rebellion in this neighborhood. Maybe it's time we loosen up the reins a bit." With that, the room erupted into cheers. People clapped, laughed, and stood in solidarity with Joe. It was clear that Karen had lost control. She had pushed too far, too hard. And now the tide had turned against her. In the face of overwhelming opposition, Karen's resolve shattered. She slammed her fist on the podium in frustration, the sound echoing throughout the room. "Fine," she shouted. "You all want to live in a circus? You want to let every crazy person paint their house however they like? Fine. I'm done." She turned on her heel, her face twisted in defeat. "I'm resigning." Effective immediately, the crowd went wild, clapping and cheering. And Joe couldn't help but laugh. His victory was complete. Karen had been humiliated. And the Hoa was left reeling. No more beige tyranny. No more rules that stifled creativity. The neighborhood had spoken. And they had chosen Joe's side. In the days that followed, the community rallied behind Joe's invisible house. People stopped by constantly to admire it. And some even left small gifts on the porch, flowers, notes, and even small artistic trinkets to show their support. Joe had not only beaten Karen but had also started a movement in the neighborhood. His house had become a symbol of rebellion against conformity and the oppressive, soul-crushing rules of the Hoa. Joe spent the following Saturday with a grill going and a cooler full of drinks, hosting a neighborhood party right in front of his now infamous house. The 3D glasses were passed around for people to enjoy the full effect. And laughter filled the air as people marveled at the artful illusion. As for Karen, the rumor mill had already begun to churn. It was said she moved to a new gated community where the rules were so strict they dictated the exact shade of white for window trim. Joe could only imagine her, pacing the sterile, beige halls of her new home, her grip on control slipping more and more each day. Life with the invisible house had settled into a strange kind of normalcy. Joe's house had become an unintentional tourist attraction, bringing people from all over to see the disappearing house in person. It was surreal. But Joe wouldn't have had it any other way. As he stood in front of his now iconic home, watching neighbors laugh and take pictures, Joe smiled. The battle had been won. And in the end, the real victory wasn't just about his house, it was about his community, coming together to stand against the tyranny of conformity. And for Joe, that was more than enough.